All right. Welcome everyone. It's great to see so many people here. This is quite a big crowd tonight. This is really nice to see. My name is Nicholas Manousis. I'm the president of the Horological Society of New York, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here to our June meeting. As usual, let's get started with a few announcements. It's not quite summer yet, but this is the last lecture for HSNY for the season. So after tonight, we're going to take our usual summer break. July and August will be off. But I also want to just take this chance to remind everyone that while we won't have lectures in July or August, our office and our classroom will still be open and we'll still have our classes as usual. And also, I'd like to remind everyone to keep an eye out in your email inbox. We're going to be sending out our HSNY summer survey pretty soon. And please take a few minutes to fill that out. It really helps us to figure out what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, and how to improve for the future. So watch for that coming soon. All right. And next weekend, we're going to be taking a trip. We're going to Hong Kong for a weekend of traveling education. And I believe that we have just a few tickets still available. So if you're watching us online and you're in Hong Kong and you're interested in attending the class, sign up quickly. Or if you're here in New York and you have a friend in Hong Kong that may be interested, let them know. I think there's just maybe 2 or 3 tickets left. And that's going to be a lot of fun. We're really grateful to our hosts this time, Watchbox, in partnership with the Upper House in Hong Kong. So we're really looking forward to that next weekend. I'd like to take a moment to introduce some special guests that we have here tonight. Mr. Akio Naito, he's the chairman and CEO of Grand Seiko Corporation of America. And Mr. Kazunori Hoshino, he's the product planner and designer at Seiko Epson Corporation. And they're seated here in the front row if they want to say hi. Thank you for being here tonight. All right, on to tonight's lecture. So have you ever looked at the seconds hand on your mechanical watch and noticed how it's starting and stopping at fractions of a second? Have you ever wondered why that's happening? What's causing that? I can try and briefly explain it to you. It's the escapement that's starting and stopping the gear train, and it's translating rotational motion into lateral impulses. And that's the tick-tock sound that we hear when we hold the watch up to our ears. But if we take a step back, if we take a moment to think about the bigger picture, time never stops, not even for fractions of a second. It's continuous. And there is one watch out there whose second hand never stops as well, and that's the spring drive. And tonight, we're going to go deep into the spring drive, talk about its history, its function, how it works, and we're really going to learn a lot about this mechanism tonight. So our speaker for the evening is the brand curator and national training manager for Grand Seiko Corporation of America. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Joseph Kirk.
Wow, this is awesome. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight and listening to us talk about the wonderful mechanism of spring drive. I'm really excited to be here, really grateful to be speaking here in front of Horological Society of New York. Of course, very grateful to be partnered with them and really appreciate everything they do for us as well as our industry. So we'll get into spring drive, right? A lot of us are familiar with it. We've at least heard of it. But how does it work? That's what we're all here for tonight, I think. So spring drive, to sum it up in a nutshell, is a mechanical watch that attains the high accuracy, precision, and stability of a quartz watch. It has a completely continuous motion, as Nick mentioned. There's really nothing else in the industry that has anything like it, and it's very unique in that sense. Kind of like to start off the lecture by actually quoting a good friend of ours and a master craftsman from our micro artist studio in central Japan named Yoshifusa Nakazawa. Mr. Nakazawa said, Japan's history is very old, so time flows slowly for us. I think that's very important to Japanese people. Looking at the movement of the second hand, it's like being able to feel the natural slow flow of time. And I think that makes it a very Japanese watch. He's right. The completely continuous motion of spring drive glides effortlessly across the dial. It's very humbling. It's very unique, silent. So I'd like to touch a little bit on spring drive and how it connects to time and nature. And when I say time, I also mean history, right? The history of watchmaking in Japan, a little bit of a touch on history because I don't want to dwell on it too much. But to give you the long story short, there's always been some influence, let's say, from nature in Japanese timekeepers. When we go back to the mid-7th century, we have what's called the rokoku, or the water clock, which was adapted to Japan. And this is utilizing nature to keep time. Also, the rokoku has a continuous motion, right? Completely fluid motion, just like spring drive. Now, there were other timekeepers utilized in Japan. This is used for many, many years, right? This is something that was around for a very long time. They also utilized sundials, again, using nature to express time. One of my favorite aspects of Japan's watchmaking history is the temporal timekeepers, right? So temporal time, or utilizing lunar time as opposed to solar time as we know it, right? Instead of doing 24 hours, 60 seconds, 60-minute format, they would actually measure time depending on season. So these complex clocks, called wadokes, they actually changed depending on what season it was, right? The hours would actually shift across the dial. So during the winter solstice, right, the hours of the day would be shorter, and the indexes would shift to express that. And then in the summer, the hours would change and become longer, right? The nights would become shorter. So this unique mechanism is, again, a very unusual, let's say, expression of time and nature. So the wadokes were primarily weight-driven. Towards the end of their era in the Edo era, which was beginning of the 1600s through towards the end of the 1800s, around 1868, this was, the timekeeper that mostly, like I said, was weight-driven, but also utilized mainsprings towards the end. And so this method is getting us kind of into the spring drive aspect of our segment, right? So mechanical clocks typically today are all powered by mainsprings, right? There's a few that use alternate methods, but the mainspring is what we're here to talk about today, right? So not many watchmakers, actually the wadoki is pretty much out of existence at this point, right? There's only maybe one watchmaker in Japan who does independently a wadoke type clock that also actually tells regular time. His name is Masahiro Kikuno. But moving forward, right, 1872, they finally adapted, let's say, they started to adapt the Western method of timekeeping, that 24 hours, 60 minutes, 60-second format that I had mentioned, right? So this Western method of timekeeping came about towards the end of 1872. 1873 is when it was really adapted throughout the country. And by 1874, a young man named Kintaro Hattori became an apprentice at Kameda Clock Shop in Japan. I bring up Mr. Hattori and his journey in watchmaking, right? The name may be familiar. He's actually the founder of Seiko, as we know it today. So he was a pioneer in watchmaking in Japan. He was one of the early developers of working on these types of watches. And so by 1881, he formed Kei Hattori and Company, which later became known as Seiko. They had a factory in Tokyo, and it was called Seikosha. That was essentially where the name derived, let's say. So Seikosha, their first product that they produced was a mainspring-powered wall clock that ran for 8 days. So this was essentially the first Seikosha timekeeper to utilize a mainspring. In 1895, they launched their first pocket watch, also utilizing a mainspring as the power source. In this pocket watch was a cylinder escapement, right? Not very common in watches today. This is something that has kind of fallen by the wayside. Later in 1913, they also introduced Japan's first wristwatch. But 1899, I like to bring up because Seiko had produced their first lever escapement watch. Now, lever escapements are the most common form of regulator in mechanical watchkeeping, or in mechanical timekeeping today, let's say. So this was the first adaptation of a lever escapement. And the lever escapement was originally created in 1750 by Thomas Mudge, so it's been around a very long time and is still dominant in watchmaking today. So getting into the lever escapement, right, I'd like to take a little time and explain how it works. So as I mentioned, it's powered by a spring, right? There's a spring that coils up inside of a big housing gear called the barrel. The barrel is winding the spring either by manually winding the watch, or if it's an automatic watch, let's say, is wound by motion of your wrist. So the spring tightens inside the barrel, and as it starts to uncoil, it drives this big housing gear that it's in, like I said, called the barrel, right? That barrel transfers energy to the next gear in the train, the second wheel, then onto the next, the third wheel, and then onto the next, the fourth wheel. Well, if there's no regulation, if there's no control of the pace of time, time flies, right? The hands just spin across the dial as fast as they can, and there's no power left in a very, very quick period of time. So the escapement, or more specifically the lever escapement, is your form of regulation, right? The balance wheel acts almost, let's say, as a pendulum, right? It oscillates. It rocks back and forth. And this develops a rhythm to keep an even pace of time. So this is your regulation, like I said, right? This is your pace, this is your rhythm, this is how we keep time. And it actually, as Nick had mentioned, it stops and releases, right? It stops the gear train and releases the energy. It's letting energy escape in a controlled fashion, right? This is where the name escapement comes from. So the balance wheel rocking back and forth, right? You have a little jewel on the balance wheel, which is called the impulse pin. The impulse pin, as it moves, knocks the lever, right? The lever escapement, right? This is the lever, also known as a pallet fork, which has 2 jewels on it, right? Your pallet jewels. The pallet jewels lock the teeth of the escape wheel. It locks on the flat inner or outer surface, which is called the locking plane of the pallet jewel. So there you can see how it's stopping and then letting go, letting the escape wheel turn. As it does that, the tooth of the escape wheel slides across the angled plane that's in front of it, right? This is called the impulse plane. And that energy from the escape wheel actually transfers energy through the lever and delivers that energy back to the balance wheel so it can keep a good momentum, right? It can oscillate. It keeps the amplitude high. This is how it essentially keeps time, right? With a stop and go motion. Lock and release, lock and release. As you can imagine, there's a lot of collision, a lot of friction that occurs in a lever escapement. But over the years, there's been a lot of developments to help heal, right? To help keep it operating for hundreds of years that we've been using it. So frequency, right? This is how fast that balance wheel is rocking back and forth, or the oscillation rate, right? How fast does it move? So high-frequency watches were really chased during the 60s, right? There was a lot of development in high-frequency watches during the 60s. A lot of companies were doing it. The benefit of having a high frequency is that you're eliminating margin for error, right? There's less effect from shock or outside factors as that balance wheel is rocking at a faster pace. So that's the benefit. But unfortunately, there's a lot of wear and tear that comes along with that. So moving at the faster pace has its upside, but there's also a big downside that would be frequent servicing. We found today, right, most watches have a frequency of 4 hertz. 4 hertz is equivalent to 8 beats in a second, or 28,800 beats in 1 hour. So we hear these numbers a lot. What do they mean? That's the balance wheel's frequency, right? So one full oscillation back and forth is equivalent to a hertz in 1 second, right? That's the whole oscillation, back and forth. 8 beats would be half of that oscillation, or one direction. In quartz watchmaking, however, right, they utilize a quartz crystal to develop frequency. And this is where things start to get tricky, because a lot of people don't necessarily understand how quartz watches work. But the reason quartz watches tend to be significantly more accurate than mechanical watches is because they have a very high frequency, right? So instead of 4 hertz, a quartz crystal cut into a tuning fork shape can oscillate at 32,768 hertz in 1 second, right? Over 32,000 times it's oscillating in 1 second. That's a significant amount more. That's 8,000 times more than your 4 hertz escapement, right? Your balance wheel. This is why it's so precise, right? There's less factors contributing to error, right? Minimizing that margin for error. So in 1880, Jacques and Pierre Kerry discovered the piezoelectric effect, and this pertains to quartz watchmaking. This is why I'm bringing it up. They discovered that if you compress a material such as quartz, it will actually produce a small electrical current. Right? But in quartz watchmaking, it's actually the inverse effect that's applied. So if you apply a current to a quartz crystal, it deforms, or it starts to vibrate or oscillate. So this is how you get the frequency. You apply a little bit of electrical current to a quartz crystal, and it makes it wiggle, right? It makes it move. Quartz watchmaking was chased by many, again, during the 60s, late 60s, through the 70s. It's something that back then was much more prestigious, let's say, than it's found today. I think that primarily because of the 80s and 90s, quartz watchmaking became considered low end, right? But back during the 70s, quartz watches were quite expensive. Many people forget that or don't realize that. So with that said, I'd like to hopefully give you a little bit of an education on how a quartz watch works. Because it's different, right? It's not something we necessarily hear about. So the quartz wristwatch mechanism, right, at least the most common form that you'll find today, utilizes a battery, right? This is the power source instead of a mainspring. So your battery is giving you that little bit of electricity to make sure that your watch is getting a frequency to develop a pace of time. So the battery delivers the electricity to the integrated circuit. The integrated circuit then in turn delivers the electricity to the quartz crystal. The quartz crystal oscillator vibrates at that very fast pace that I talked about, right? 32,768 hertz, in case you forgot already. It's pretty quick. That frequency is then measured again by the integrated circuit, and it sends an electromagnetic pulse through these coils and coil block, right? So the coil block acts as a delivery system. This electromagnetic pulse is delivering energy basically once per second, right? That's why a second hand jumps on a quartz watch from second to second. It ticks, right? This is to help conserve energy in the battery. So when it's delivering this energy, how do we translate that into mechanical energy, right? This electromagnetic pulse interacts with a rotor, and not like a rotor in a self-winding watch, right? It's not the same. This is actually what we call a permanent magnet. A permanent magnet is like what you would put on your fridge, right? You hang a picture on your refrigerator. That's what a permanent magnet is. It's always a magnet. On that magnet is a pinion, right, or teeth. It's like a little gear that's attached to that magnet. So the coils and coil block deliver electromagnetic energy to make that little rotor jump once per second. That electromagnetic pulse is making it jump. And that's how you deliver energy to your gear train. This is your hands, right? The gear train is driving your hands. And unfortunately, quartz watches don't have a lot of torque, so they can't really handle big, heavy hands necessarily. So, but in order to preserve battery life, you have a second hand that jumps from second to second, and you use lightweight hands. So Seiko, you saw the 1969 Quartz Astron was pictured there. That was the first commercially available quartz watch. sold in Japan, was created actually by Suwa Seikosha. Right? Suwa Seikosha is in central Japan in the Nagano prefecture. Now it's known as Seiko Epson. Right? Just to give you a brief rundown, Epson was born from an electronic printer developed for the 1964 Tokyo Olympics. A lot of people think Epson, the projector company or the printer company, is no affiliation to timekeeping. It was actually a timekeeper. So just so you know kind of a little bit of the history, the background of where this name comes from, right? It built an entire dynasty, right? It's an entirely separate company. But now Seiko Epson in Shiojiri in Nagano, Japan, is responsible for making wristwatches, right? And they were named in honor of the success of the Epson printer. So just so you know a little bit of history where that name came from. So 1971, right, a young engineer named Yoshikazu Akahane joined Suwa Seikosha. And he was really a brilliant engineer. He developed something really cool in our history called the twin quartz. Right? It used two quartz crystals that compensated temperature for each other. Right? They used the average between the two to determine how accurate the watch could be. And back in the 70s, he was able to create this and make watches that were accurate within 5 seconds per year. Pretty astounding, right? I think you can become that accurate in the 70s. But it was true. So that wasn't his other big deal, right? His big deal, his big concept, his big idea was he wanted to take the best of both worlds in watchmaking, right? The mainspring, unlike a battery, is a never-ending power source. This is always there. You wind it up, it runs, right? It doesn't deplete. So the never-ending power source of the battery, coupled with high torque, because as I mentioned, quartz watches don't have high torque, he wanted to get rid of the weak point, which is the escapement. Right? The escapement is great. Like I said, it's been around hundreds of years. But it's very influenced by position or shock or temperature. So he wanted to create something that had all the benefits of quartz in terms of precision and stability, right? But have this high power source, this never-ending power source from a mainspring. So he had this idea in 1977. He was way ahead of his time. So this idea, right, was based on a bicycle rolling down a hill. And that had no brakes, just so you know. But by utilizing brakes, you can slow the speed, keep an even controlled pace. Unfortunately, applying a physical brake is not good, right? Because friction is a watchmaker's worst enemy, so we don't want that. So friction had to be eliminated, right? So to eliminate friction, he took that electromagnetic energy and came up with the concept for spring drive. So in 1982, right, they had the first functioning prototype of spring drive. Pretty remarkable. Had a 4-hour power reserve. Okay, maybe it wasn't that remarkable, but you got it to work, and that's what's important, right? They were on the right path. So the first spring drive, like I said, had 4-hour power reserve. It wasn't as energy efficient as necessary, right? And it took a lot of power consumption. So in order to improve, it took time. By 1993, the next evolution in spring drive had occurred. Boosted, right? 4 hours, now it's 10. And this was thanks to a new integrated circuit technology that helped reduce electronic and electromagnetic power consumption, let's say. So this aspect was able to increase the power reserve because it didn't have to work as hard to try and make those electronic components work. In 1997, big breakthrough came, right? They had this internal goal for spring drive. They wanted to make it run for 48 hours, right? So 4 hours, then 10 hours. We got to get to 48. Well, they did it in 1997. All right, 1997, the reason this was possible was because of a new integrated circuit technology that was developed by Seiko Epson, or Suwa Seikosha as it was formerly known, right? So this prototype led to the first debut of a prototype in April at Basel World 1998. Success, right? We're getting there. A little funky design, but still very cool. I'd take one. Sad part of the story today, though. Mr. Akahane, the brilliant engineer behind Spring Drive, he died in August, at the young age of 52. Thankfully, though, he was able to see his dream come to life, right? He had met his goal, and that is a huge, huge success in, I think, all of our eyes at this point, right? Spring Drive is really something special. So Mr. Akahane's legend lived on in Spring Drive, still does today. And in 1999, they launched the very first commercially available spring drives. Now, these were only released in Japan, so you may not see them, right? There's something that don't float around very often. I'm not hinting at anything that you might be able to see after we're done. So this was very small production, right? These were manually wound. They had a 48-hour power reserve. They made 500 in stainless steel under the Seiko name brand. They made 300 in gold, also under the Seiko name brand. And then they made 100 in pure platinum under the Curator name brand. So this was the first generation of spring drive as we know it. Like I said, all limited edition and only sold in Japan. So those were the first commercially available. From there, it wasn't until 2003 that the next real big development had occurred. And this was self-winding, right? It seems simple, but no, you have to have high energy efficiency, high winding efficiency. A lot of factors come into play in making this thing work. So thanks to the magic lever winding system, they were able to make a very highly efficient self-winding movement. And from that, right, and also a new mainspring material. In 2004, they debuted the first Grand Seiko caliber, right? This is the 9R spring drive. So the 9R had a 3-day power reserve and this amazing accuracy that's coming along with basically all spring drives, right? It's within 15 seconds per month, right? Equivalent to less than a second a day. Very accurate, very stable. In 2005, they launched it for the first time internationally. That was in the 5R Seiko spring drive brand. So all this development, right? You have from 1977 all the way to 2005 to make it a commercial product worldwide. It was 28 years. That's a big investment. That's a big commitment, but it was done. And like I said before, Mr. Akahane's dream lives on. Now comes the hard part. How does spring drive work? I think everyone wants to know. It's a mystery, right? It's an enigma to many. All right, so as you saw before, you're going to see similarities from both worlds of watchmaking. You're going to see the mainspring, right? It operates the same. Unwinds inside the barrel, delivers energy to the gear train, and then by the time you get to where the escapement should be, it looks very, very different, right? We call this very different escapement system. We call it a trisynchro regulator. This is the magic behind spring drive. I should say some of the magic behind spring drive. So instead of using a balance wheel that rocks back and forth, we have what's called a glide wheel, and it rolls in one direction, right? On the axis of that glide wheel is a permanent magnet, like I said before, something you can throw on your fridge. It's always a magnet. You have coils and coil block, which you saw from the Quartz. You also saw in Quartz an integrated circuit and a quartz crystal oscillator, right? So our fun fact of the day, if you have a permanent magnet, right, always a magnet, and it's in motion near a conductive material, such as copper, in this instance it's copper, right, you can actually generate electricity. So this motion generates electrical current, right? So there are 3 forms of energy utilized in spring drive. You have mechanical energy, which generates the electricity coming from the mainspring, right? You have electricity, which powers your integrated circuit and your quartz crystal. And then you have electromagnetic energy. That's the fun part, right? That's where we're getting a little complicated. I'll show you in just a minute. All right, so the mechanical energy aspect, right? The power from the mainspring drives the gear train, and it turns the glide wheel and magnet. All right, so that magnet starts to spin near the conductive material, aka the copper coiled wires, and it generates a little bit of electricity. That little bit of electricity is utilized to power an integrated circuit. Right? And just another fun fact, by the time that they had developed the 1993 prototype, they still needed to reduce power by 1/5. The first prototype by almost 100 times. It's a very low power integrated circuit, just so you guys know. Then from there, you have the quartz crystal's oscillation. So this thing's vibrating, just like in your typical quartz watch, 32,768 hertz, or within 1 second, right? From there, the integrated circuit measures the frequency of the quartz crystal to calculate time. And then, the integrated circuit measures the speed of the glide wheel, right? It measures the rotational speed of the glide wheel. So if that glide wheel starts moving too fast, it utilizes the coils and coil block to deliver an electromagnetic pulse to the magnet that's spinning on the glide wheel. So the glide wheel needs to spin exactly 8 times per second. And if it starts to spin faster than that, the integrated circuit applies electromagnetic energy, delivers it back through the coils and coil block to react with the magnet that's on there. So you have an electromagnet, which is essentially turning on and off, reacting with a magnet that's always a magnet. And this is how it slows the speed of the glide wheel. And then in turn, it slows the speed of the next gear in the train, and then the next one, and then the next one, and eventually the barrel. So you have a completely unidirectional motion without collision, without friction, right, that you would find in your typical escapement that's ultra precise. Pretty neat. I hope it makes sense. I try my best. So one of the big challenges, as I mentioned before in spring drive, was energy efficiency. Right? So energy efficiency, power consumption was huge on those early prototypes, and as they went on over the decades that came along with it. One of the big hurdles that we overcame, and you saw in that 1997 prototype, was the development in-house of an SOI-IC, or a silicon-on insulator integrated circuit. Right? And basically what this is, it's an integrated circuit, but unlike others, it utilizes a silicon dioxide film to prevent parasitic traits, right, which equate to power loss, right, it's losing electricity, and also another trait called leakage. So leakage is another form of energy loss. So by using a silicon dioxide film in the integrated circuit, it prevents the power loss. So it makes it much more energy efficient. It needs less energy to run. What's also cool about that is that most integrated circuits, after some time, when they fail, most of the time, it's due to leakage. That's one of the big problems with most integrated circuits that you'll find, let's say, as an example, in a quartz watch. So this is something that helps contribute to multiple aspects of spring drive's operation. So here's another fun fact, right? How much energy, or how much electricity is actually utilized in spring drive to make it work? It's 25 nanowatts. To give you an idea of how little energy that actually is, if everyone in the United States, right, there's 328 million people wearing a spring drive watch, they would barely be able to power a 10-watt LED light bulb. That's very low power. It's almost nothing, but it's a little something. Has to be, otherwise spring drive wouldn't work, right? So another aspect to improve energy efficiency on spring drive was actually the way the copper coil wire is bound around the coil block. So in many quartz watches, you'll see this typical coil alignment, right? It's very sporadic. There's a lot of little gaps between these coils. That also equates to energy loss, both in the electronic side and electromagnetic side of the tri-synchro regulator. So by creating a perfect coil alignment, and when I say perfect, it looks pretty perfect, right? It's actually wound 25,000 times around the coil block. You need to see it. We have it in the display back there. Take a look. It's very, very small, right? Very small component. What's even more impressive is that this wire is only 15 microns in thickness, right, in its diameter. Human hair is 40 microns. That's a very thin wire. All right, so it's not just on the electronic side of watchmaking that spring drive needs to improve on energy efficiency in order for it to work. So another aspect on the mechanical side is we do pinion polishing. All right, so as I mentioned before, friction is bad, right? We don't want it in our watches. So the rough surface of an unpolished pinion creates friction, which equates power loss, right? Minimal, but still. By polishing every single pinion leaf or tooth in the pinion, you're able to reduce friction and help improve that energy efficiency. On top of that, there's a really cool mainspring in there that provides a long duration of 72 hours and enough torque to drive everything, make everything work. So the mainspring is also a contributing factor to bringing spring drive to life. Now, this aspect isn't about energy efficiency, but more ensuring quality, right? So, and people just find it interesting. Quartz crystals are grown in-house for spring drive. So this way we can assure high quality when we cut them into these little tuning forks in order to develop the frequency in our watches. So it's a cool process. If you have questions about it, come ask me afterwards. I'll talk about it all night. So spring drive, it's a very complex mechanism, right? We had gone through all the prototypes, all the development, but realistically, spring drive has over 200 components starting in the most minimalized movement. So over 200 components, all the way up to as high as 680. So depending on what movement it is, you'll see which ones. So these are all assembled by hand, of course, in order to make sure everything is adjusted appropriately. And this way, energy is transferred appropriately, right? You want to make sure you have good hands assembling the watch to make sure the transmission of energy through the gear train is perfect. So that's another aspect. There are two studios that make spring drive movements, right? One is the Shinshu Watch Studio, which is in Shiojiri in Nagano, same place where Suwa Seiko show was. And then there's the Micro Artist Studio, right? That does all the real remarkable handcrafted pieces that, like the Curator H2. You're going to see some of these in the slide in case you're not familiar. You'll also see some of those in the back for the presentation. Brought them special tonight, of course. But one of these pieces from the Micro Artist Studio, actually one of the big debuts from the Micro Artist Studio that made quite the wave, was in 2006. Developed a spring drive sonore. So the sonore has about 630 components, right? 88 tools. It's a lot going on in there. So this beautiful piece, unlike most chiming watches, doesn't use gongs. It actually used a miniaturized Orin bell. So it has a bell that sits on the underside of the movement to produce the chimes. And what's really remarkable about this chiming watch is that spring drive, like I said, it has a lot of great benefits. It's very accurate, it's very stable, it's no collision, no friction, but that also means that it's silent, right? Because there's no locking and unlocking going on. There's no tick-tock. Everything glides one way. So the escapement is silent, meaning there's no background noise. So in many chiming watches, there's a governor, right? There has to be, to control the speed of the striking of the hammers. In spring drive, in the sonore, the governor is also silent, right? Little fan blades pop out, and it works off the viscosity of air to control the striking of the hammers. So there is no background noise in this chiming watch. Just pure chime. 2007, launch of a spring drive chronograph GMT. Right? Over 400 components in this spring drive GMT. I'm wearing one of those too. So this is a very remarkable movement, of course, all made in-house, very complex. It's really a reliable chronograph too, right? It's very accurate. As I mentioned before, 15 seconds a month, equivalent to less than 1 second a day is the accuracy of spring drive. That translates to the chronograph as well. It also utilizes a vertical clutch and column wheel system for enhanced performance, right? So these movements are so robust for the chronograph GMT, it was actually utilized in the 2008 spring drive spacewalk. This was actually taken to space, worn on outside of a spacesuit, outside of a spacecraft by a Russian cosmonaut. Right? Worked perfectly. There's basically no effect from, like I said before, position, shock, temperature, extreme temperatures. So there's a lot of really unique benefits that come along with spring drive and how it operates. In 2011, a new Chiming Watch was launched, right? And this one's fun. It's a minute repeater, a decimal repeater. So it chimes a low tone for the hours, a double chime every 10 minutes, and a high chime every single minute that follows. And instead of using a bell on this one, we actually work with a 52nd generation blacksmith who makes these really renowned wind chimes in Japan, right? Like a national treasure. These wind chimes produce a very beautiful tone, and this gentleman, Munemichi Myochin's his name, actually makes these gongs for us, special. So this is reproduced, again, with the silent escapement, again, with the silent governor, and pure, beautiful wind chime chimes. And you'll be able to hear this watch tonight as well. I've talked a lot about energy efficiency, right, and how power reserve was such a challenge. Another big breakthrough. In 2016, Spring Drive launched the first grand Seiko caliber from the Micro Artist Studio, the same guys making the minute repeater and the sonore. This had an 8-day power reserve. So this is executed by utilizing 3 barrels, right? But the 3 barrels unwind simultaneously, which is pretty unique. They also eliminate any intermediate gears between the barrels, and this helps eliminate energy loss. So, and there's quite a few factors. This 8-day was really driven by eliminating energy loss in order to achieve this high power reserve. So it's 2019. It's the 20th anniversary of the very first commercially available spring drive watches. So we had to do something cool for that, right? 2 new calibers were launched this year. Another cool innovation, right? So the first one I'll talk about is the 9R31 caliber. It's as thin as the original, yet it has a longer power reserve of 72 hours instead of 48. This is achieved by using 2 mainsprings, but uniquely, they're all housed in 1 barrel, and they unwind simultaneously. So this new system is implemented in this 9R31 caliber. Another attribute, and this goes back to 2008 when we launched the first Curator. A lot of people are familiar with the Curator H, is porcelain dial Curator. There's been the first generation, so H1, and then the H2, utilizes a special system called the torque return system. And so the torque return system is currently used in the Curator H2, gives it a 60-hour power reserve, right? And what this does is most mechanical watches, I should say all mechanical watches, have high torque when it's a full power reserve, right? And there's always extra torque that just ends up lost in transmission. So this really innovative system utilizes the excess torque from the barrel when it's unwinding and sends it through a separate gear train that comes back around to the ratcheting wheel and is actually rewinding the watch. So that way it enhances the power reserve from what should be 48 all the way up to 60. Pretty neat. So for the new caliber that we launched, the 9R02, that was alongside the 9R31, we use the same 2 mainspring and 1 barrel system, but this time we add the torque return. Right? And this is crafted by our Micro Artist Studio. And the power reserve is a full day longer than the H2. Instead of 60, it's an 84-hour power reserve. So there have been a lot of innovations with spring drive over the years, right? And I'm sure at some point in time there will be more to come. At the end, you have a mechanically powered watch or a spring-driven watch, hence the name, that attains the high accuracy of quartz, right? With the ultimate stability and accuracy, no effect from position, shock, no collision, friction. So a lot of really cool things were done in this movement, right? And time is expressed moving one way, forward, right? Just like time itself, only moving in one direction, as Nick had mentioned. So with that said, this is spring drive and how it relates to nature and time. I'm not quite done yet, though. I'd like to invite our very special guest, Mr. Akio Naito, and Mr. Kazunori Hoshino to the stand. Mr. Naito is the chairman and CEO of Grand Seiko Corporation of America, and Mr. Hoshino is product planner and designer at Seiko Epson Corporation, responsible for probably some of your favorite designs in Grand Seiko and Spring Drive.
Thank you, Joe. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure and honor to be able to present the spring drive technology, our proprietary technology we are so much proud of. And I hope you all enjoyed Joe's presentation. The gist of Joe's presentation, I think, is that there are two pillars, the essential pillars which made it possible for the technology to be born. One is the highly sophisticated technical design, which was made possible by a team of engineers coming from a wide spectrum of technological fields. We have a very long history in the mechanical watchmaking, as Joe explained. Not only that, we have so many engineers working very hard for many years in the fields of quartz crystal making, as well as electronics and various peripheral or ancillary fields. With combining all these knowledge and expertise, we were able to come up with the pinnacle of the watchmaking technology, not just out of a single technological field, but multiple fields that were necessary to make this happen. The other essential pillar which made it possible for the technology was born was the ability, technological capability to execute what was conceived as the pinnacle of technical design. And here, as you can see, there are so many parts which made up spring drive movement, and every single component depicted here was developed and produced in-house. We are vertically integrated manufacturer. So with these two pillars, this very unique technology, spring drive, was born. And today, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Kazunori Hoshino from Seiko Epson. Mr. Hoshino joined Seiko Epson in 1996, and through experiencing various product design and product development from very high-end to very low-end, he joined Micro Artist Studio in the year 2012 and has been in charge of various masterpiece products, including H2.
すいません。今日はこのような場所で、私たちの時計をつけてきてくださっている皆さんの前で、お話をすることができて大変光栄です。今日はよろしくお願いいたします。
I'm so honored and pleased to see so many of you have been wearing my products, and it is my honor to make a presentation tonight.
じゃあこれからですね、私が、デザインとしてですね、大切にしてきたことを少しお話しさせていただきます。
So let me speak a little bit about what I think is important in my work as a product planner and designer.
はい、一番最初にですね、今まで話してきた強い意志を感じられるものを表現することを目指しました。
What I think is extremely important is how to realize the power of strong will, which one conceived in coming up with a new product or new technology.
はい、その中で2つの点に注力しています。一つは用の美と言われる機能美を作り込むこと。2つ目は見立てと言われるように物語を時計の中に盛り込むことです。
And two important elements exist here. One is what we call the beauty of utility or beauty of functionality. And the other is what is called in Japanese mitate, which is by imagining something through seeing something different but resembling.
はい。では一つ目ですね、その用の美というものになります。もろもろいろんなものを省きながらですね、一枚の複雑なものを整理して一つのものにするということで、一枚板のムーブメントを作りました。
Here, this represents the beauty of utility or beauty of functionality to eliminate what tends to be complex into a simple but clear design. And you can see a bridge is made of one plate here.
従来ブリッジは3つぐらいに分けた方が加工、取り付けですね、組み立ても楽ですし、いろんな表現をすることができます。
For the ease of production, as well as the range of various design aesthetics, normally the bridge is made into 2 or 3 parts, but here it is just a single plate.
しかしですね、一つにすることで、組み立て上のばらつきをなくすということを可能にすることができます。
However, because this is made of a single plate, to attain the consistency in quality, we gain the advantage.
それによって、スプリングドライブのエネルギーの損失を減らすことができますが、一方で製造するものに特別な技能、1回で組み立てるというスキルを求めるものにもなっています。
So this also achieved the efficiency, as Joe explained, but at the same time, this requires the highly skillful craftsmanship to realize based on this single plate.
今、機能のお話をさせていただきました。これから、その見立てというものについてお話をさせていただきます。
I just explained the beauty part of it, and in terms of the functionality, now I'm turning to a mitate.
はい、実はこの一枚受けは、私たちが仕事をしているそばの高台から見た景色になります。
The scenery you are looking at is the view from the micro artist studio where Mr. Hoshino works.
そこから見えるですね、日本一高い富士山のような商品を作ろうということで、富士山を表現しながら、その横パワーリザーブのところは水をためるものになっておりますので、パワーをためるものということでスワッグをイメージしています。
So when we started producing this product, we thought of achieving the highest in terms of the product design and quality. So Mount Fuji is the highest mountain in Japan. So we wanted to realize that scenery of Mount Fuji into this bridge. And whereas the power reserve on right-hand side, it's the source of power, and Lake Suwa is just in front of our studio. So we put Lake Suwa into the right-hand side.
この時計を見たときにこの気持ちを感じていただければ光栄です。
I hope you will use your imagination to see our scenery in front of the studio by looking at this backside of the watch.
はい。実はですね、このモデルだけが私たちがしてきたことではなくて、スプリングドライブすべてにこのようなお話の見立てが入っています。
Not only that particular model, but also every spring drive watch we made, there has been a story for each one of them.
このキャリバー QR65 は逆にですね、反対の景色を見た時のアルプスの山々を表現しています。
In case of this caliber movement 9R65, it is reflected here is Japan Alps, the mountainous scenery of the neighborhood, so long as woodlands close to the populated area. Japan is made of 80% of the landscape is made of mountains, so we are very much familiar with this scenery.
実は H2 にもついています。
And the same goes with H2.
こちらはですね、日本絵画で見られるすやり霞というものをモチーフにしたものです。右上に、月ですね、月が見え、霞のような雲が見えるかと思います。
So the theme was taken from the old Japanese painting and the natural scene of moon and a cloud or mist underneath.
はい、水辺ですので、ここからちょっと秘密なんですけど、遊び心でカエルをここに表現していま
Then
す。
we put a frog in a pound.
はい、これが H2 の楽しみかなと思っています。
So this is something we can enjoy by seeing H2, which not many people can realize.
はい、じゃあ、少し、技術的にそれを実現した技、技法についてこの後お話しさせていただきます。
And let me touch upon the technological aspect of realizing all these aesthetics points.
ムーブメントの特徴として、日本人としてですかね、光と影、陰影を表現することをムーブメントに考えました。
As a Japanese, I wanted to realize the Japanese ancient philosophy of light and shadow.
まず一つ目はその影の部分の筋目ですね。こちらに
Shadow is realized here by hairline.
はい、大きな一枚受けのところにまっすぐに一本の線で筋目を表現しています。
So a relatively big bridge over here and applying hairline finish.
実はこれは筋目を切れないようにするためにはまっすぐにフラットな面を作ることが一番重要です。
To realize consistent and continuous hairline, the surface has to be completely flat.
はい、それをあえてなくしてきれいに筋目をつけることで光を殺しています。
And by applying hairline finish, on a perfectly flat surface, it realizes the concept of shadow.
それによってこれから見ていただく表面の部分が光を放ちます。
Now here is a mirror finish part, which in contrast realizes the light as opposed to a shadow.
ここはすべて手で磨いております。
And this part, the mirror finish was realized by manually, by handmade.
そしてさらにですね、従来は凸、とっかったところにだけ鏡面をかけていたんですが、新しく入り角と言われる内側に入った面についても手作業で作業しています。ここは手でしか作業ができない場所になります。
This portion here is particularly difficult to apply a mirror finish because of the complex shape.
これによって2つの要素が光と影を作り出すことで、日本人しかできない時計のムーブメントができたというふうに考えています。
So, as a characteristic of Japanese traditional culture and philosophy, light and shadow is now realized through this craftsmanship and manual skills.
はい、簡単になりますが以上です。
Thank you very much for your attention.
right. About that time of the evening for Q&A. If anybody has a question, raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you. Starting in the back.
Thank you very much for this presentation. And during the lecture tonight, you mentioned that the efficiency has improved many times since the project began 40 years ago. Can you speak a little bit to how the accuracy of the watches has also improved?
はい、基本的にクォーツの精度になりますので、精度についての考え方は完成されていたというふうに考えています。
Because we conceived this technology out of Quartz watch, so in terms of the standard accuracy, it was from the beginning realized. But on the other hand, because there are certain models which have specially adjusted high accuracy, in which case the accuracy is improved, but it wasn't a part of the technological development in itself.
Was there ever any thought into licensing the spring drive technology to other companies, or will spring drive forever be kept in-house and proprietary to Seiko?
Okay, I think there are two parts. One is, of course, this is our proprietary technology, and we have kept this technology just within ourselves. I don't believe there is any intention of making this available to the third parties. Having said, even if we disclose all the technological information, as I mentioned, unless you control the quality of uncompromising each of the components to the highest level of technical specifications, it is impossible for you to make technology like this one.
You mentioned that the efficiency was driven by the integrated circuit many times. Does the advance of gallium nitride mean that you can achieve even greater efficiency going forward, or is it a mechanical issue that you're running into now with increasing the power reserve of these watches?
I think for the most part, in terms of integrated circuit technology, it's more so, it's more so capacity in terms of size. Like, we could do many different aspects of manufacturing techniques to increase the duration. Obviously we launched, new caliber with 2 springs in 1 barrel. In terms of energy efficiency, in terms of integrated circuits, as you saw, it's very little in terms of power consumption at this point. It wouldn't, I don't think, make a big difference in terms of power reserve to utilize another technology. So, yeah, I don't think that, at this point, 3-day power reserve in a single barrel is a really good duration rate. So in order to keep the size, relatively compact. So hope that answered that well.
How often does the spring drive need to be serviced?
Who wants to field this one?
Okay, as you saw in Joe's presentation, one of the advantages of spring drive is durability because of there is no friction and wear and tear. So compared to the conventional mechanical watch, the interval for overhaul is much longer. But on the other hand, to maintain the highest level of accuracy, we recommend that watch is serviced for like 4 or 5 years interval, just like a mechanical watch. But it's not the absolute necessity for the watch to continue functioning.
So Joe mentioned that there was a dimming of Quartz popularity after the 70s. Did you notice as a brand that you had a bit of an uphill battle once you started bringing Quartz technology back into the mainstream?
So it wasn't necessarily a dimming, let's say, of Quartz technology. I would say that it was actually on the rise during those eras. But because you have the 70s, it became popular, but it was more expensive. By the time it hit the 80s, it was everyone wanted, so make as fast as you can. And that's where the perception of Quartz, and maybe rightfully so, because mass production started during the 80s and 90s. I mean, this was out of necessity. People were buying, Quartz watches back then, and they enjoyed Quartz watches back then, and they were relatively inexpensive. So during the 80s and 90s, they were quite popular and sold like crazy. But it was really, I think, for the watch connoisseur, more so in recent years, that people have a look downward at Quartz. And I mean, granted, anything that's mass produced like that, maybe, like the inexpensive Quartz, if you're a connoisseur of something, you're not going to like as much something that's made of maybe vast majority plastic and made by a robot. You know what I mean? And there is still demand for Quartz today. It just depends on the person and what their desire is. So here in this community at Horological Society, I think there's a very high appreciation for mechanical watchmaking, maybe some for Quartz, but not as much. And that's why I think Spring Drive is such a unique presentation, let's say, to bring to this crowd. Because we all know mechanical watchmaking. Some maybe don't know as much about Quartz watchmaking. But, Spring Drive, you kind of maybe start to understand both. So hopefully that helped answer your question.
Any from this side of the room? Yes.
Is there any plan to release reissues of the gorgeous JDMs that we saw earlier in the presentation? I think you might be wearing one of them, Joe.
We don't know.
There's a Japanese design principle known as kanzai designing. It's to engineer a product with the consumer's emotions in mind. Excuse me. Is that something you consider when you're designing a wristwatch?
Can you elaborate that concept once again? The kanzai? Yes.
So considering the beautiful dials and the beautiful movements, is that something you consider? How the emotions of the consumer might play over?
Yes, I think what Mr. Hoshino explained in terms of mitate, or provoking one's imagination by looking at something completely different, that I think is creating the emotional feeling, and that is a part of the design philosophy.
Hi, beginner hobbyist here, but I'm just a bit perplexed as to why having two mainsprings in the same barrel is beneficial over having one double height mainspring in one barrel.
Yeah, so the benefit in this instance, right, is utilizing two mainsprings that are very long and very thin. So you don't necessarily have the torque output. If you just did one, you wouldn't have the torque output. So by utilizing two stacked, you end up with the longer duration and the high torque. So Does that answer the question, or are you talking about? I'm sorry, you were asking about the reason for stacking. Yes. Stacking the barrel, as opposed to using one big spring? No, that one I wouldn't be able to answer. So.
Well, in the current today's technological limitation within the factory, it was thought to be more economical, cost-effective to stack into two barrel as opposed to having one big barrel.
So, I think we have time. Let's have 3 more questions. We'll start here.
We have seen development on the spring drive technology creating different type of complications. First, time only, then going to chronograph, GMT, but also on the artistical side, having a sonnery, having a minute repair. Can we expect any kind of development in middle of those two extreme of technology for complications, like a calendar or so on and so forth?
Yes, we have numerous technicians and engineers working on a wide range of products, as you mentioned, and we will carefully assess the potential demand and will launch those new products in the future.
So it seems that most major brands have an iconic watch that are kind of the standard of the brand. Do you think what is Grand Seiko's iconic watch that all other models are held against?
Snowflake. Yeah. One word answer. And rightfully so. The snowflake is a tribute to their hometowns, Winters in Suwa and Nagano, where Mr. Hoshino's from. It's not. You saw the 9R65. The inspiration for the movement is the mountainous region surrounding the area. So it's not just the design of the overall watch. You have the texture of the snow expressed in the dial. You have the cold feeling, and then you have, even in the movement, something paying a unique tribute to their hometown. So I think for a lot of people, it's like an emotional and sentimental connection to that watch, even though maybe they've never been to Japan or they don't they don't know that region so well. It's just and it's something unique. And I think that the people from our studios are also very connected to those watches as well. So, but the snowflake is not the only one that tells that story. So, we'll teach you more as time goes on.
Yes, of course, snowflake has been immensely popular, not just in the United States, but globally. But on the other hand, as Joe mentioned, there are a lot of models which are very popular. And Grand Seiko as a brand was born in 1960, so nearly 60 years of history. And in the Japanese domestic market, where consumers are far more educated in terms of the brand as well as the product range, interesting thing is the percentage of the sales of snowflake model is not that high compared to what it is in the US market. Actually, in Japan, according to, in terms of the category of the movement, mechanical watch, spring drive, and quartz, each one of the 3 calibers share the percentage of the sales is one third each. So equally distributed among 3 calibers. Whereas in this market, where we just started to launch the brand awareness, the sales are concentrated in spring drive and snowflake. But as we continue to be successful in our efforts to proliferate our brand, I think people become more interested in wide range of and diversity of products.
So we have time for one more question, and then I believe after the question, our guests will be sticking around if anyone has any further questions to talk with them one-on-one. So Melody will take the last question for tonight.
Thank you. I was just wondering if you could touch upon the process, I think it's called Suratsu, in regards to the hands.
It takes half an hour to explain that detailed process.
All right, so that's perfect. Maybe afterwards you want to talk with them some more. All right, so let's give a big hand to Mr. Naito, Mr. Hoshino, and Mr. Kirk.
Thank you.
All right, I hope everyone has a great summer. We'll see you back here in September 10th to be exact. Our next lecture is with Mr. Robert Cheney. He's the Executive Director and Curator of the Willard House and Clock Museum. So we'll see you back here in September. Have a great summer, everyone.